Hello, I'm Ramon Kuenne, Chief Customer Officer at Pathlight. And today on our CXperts podcast, I'm very excited to have our next guest, Michael Kuenne. Just to give you some background on his skills and experience. Mike, you started at Morgan Stanley as an advisor analyst, and then really started getting your consulting chops down at PwC, Price Waterhouse. And then I see here that you spent some really amazing time getting more experience around technology as a CRM analyst, technology and service ops director, and a VP of technology at Wells. And then, which warms my heart, I see that you were spent some time as a board member for a nonprofit, CFY in Atlanta, which helps low-income communities together, working with families and teachers to harness the power of digital learning. Wow, that's great. And then a senior manager, again, more technology at the Highland Company, and really the last 8+ years, director of enterprise apps, procurement and technology services, operational excellence VP, and now senior vice president, chief customer experience officer at Extended Stay America. So welcome. As I was reading kind of your background, technology obviously bubbles up, and and the fact that you're in the hospitality industry is really very timely and interesting for this conversation. So welcome to the podcast. And let's just start off by saying what's top of mind for you right now? I mean, there's no kind of agenda here, just really, our listeners are practitioners just like you and I, and anything that you might want to help them with, think through, and would be really great to hear.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's funny when you hear someone go through your background, and you brought up technology. It's been a while since I've been in solely a technology role, but it's been an undercurrent or a piece of what I've been doing for a while, especially most recently as you talk about CX. Ramon, I think the thing that I'm most passionate right now about, or evangelizing the most right now, is how do you use technology or process or whatever it might be for CX to meet the customer or guest or whatever you might call it, where they want to be met. And that's important. That matters. When you talk about technology, as practitioners, I think we're used to there being a lot of technology solutions always being thrown at us, right? Or there's always a technology solution or a vendor or a partner. And that's not to say that those aren't great. They might be fantastic. But I think it's really important to make sure you're aligning what that business need is or that customer service need is and tie it to the right technology. Because if you don't and you're not careful, you can actually end up in a worse place than where you started if you don't have a strategy or sort of a roadmap to where you need to go. I'm trying to think, an example I can give. I'll start off with whenever my kids, whenever I have to deliver news to kids, if I have good news and bad news, I always say, do you want to deliver the bad news first or the good news? I'll start off with, an example of where you have to maybe be careful of technology driving process, right, versus or technology driving strategy versus the other way around. And this is a generic example. This isn't ESA or any specific, company. But I think, any of us who travel frequently, you're familiar with, there's lots of different ways to interact with a hotel or interact with an airline. So we'll use a hotel example. So within a lot of hotel company apps or even within a website, there's an opportunity where you can chat or communicate with the hotel. That might be the hotel's enterprise, their general customer service, or it could also be just that specific hotel. So I do know of instances where there's been technology solutions implemented. So imagine you've been traveling, you get back to your room, and you need towels, you need something, right? So you're like, this is great, I'll go use that app and I'll go say, hey, I need towels, I'm in this room, whatever. And then there's silence. You don't get a response, you don't get anything. And the challenge is, because of some of what's going on actually in hospitality right now, is there's staffing issues, there's staffing shortages, right? So you need somebody on the other end of that technology to be able to have that better experience. So, a technology that might have been put in place to maybe remove friction, where they wouldn't have had to take that phone call to call down to the front desk, now actually delivered a worse guest experience because they didn't get a response. So that's just where you have to be really careful of aligning that whole process and the environment with the technology that you might select.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think there is pressure as a CX operator, obviously, to meet service levels, right? Anytime you look at your volume, you look at your staffing. And do you think kind of the pressure that's occurring right now with the shortage of staff, on the front lines, there's more pressure to kind of use automated technologies with the hope that it reduces overall volume? But, really, like to your example, someone might say, hey, there's a containment, our deflection rates improving, but really what's happening, there might be a downstream cost to it. And so I know one of the things that I've tried to mantra as well with teams is, when you implement something, try not to do any harm, meaning like not only are you looking at containment, but what's the downstream impact to the customer friction, retention, usage, and be very close to your app ratings. So like going specifically to the hospitality industry and your peers there, are there additional strategies or takeaways that might help them think about finding that kind of balance? It's a hard time. I mean, how do you, you don't have the staff, but you've got the issues coming in, what's kind of your thought there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a great point as well. You started your point with talking about, hey, is this being done because of the shortage, of staff, and are we looking to technology? And without a doubt, yes. So if you go pre-pandemic, there is, I think, a focus on that for some cost reduction, right? And that will always be there. You can call it process efficiency, but it was to be more efficient. I think it's still the same way now, but it's more of maybe a little bit more dire, especially in some circumstances where you just don't have someone to take that request. So in some cases, that automation is great, right? Because if you look at it from a IVR or technology perspective, if I can answer someone's question without them having to talk to a person, that makes them happy. It makes the other customers happy as well, because they're not waiting in the queue to get a question answered and driving up someone else's wait time. So there's a lot of really good applications for that. It's just, again, you have to be careful about making sure that you don't bring someone down a path that ends up, being, getting them a little bit more frustrated. I'm trying to think, if you can go back real quickly, Ramon, ask me your question again. I wanted to address your other point.
It's essentially finding the balance between how you mix, the human side, the analog versus the digital. And
got it.
Possibly as a corollary comment or question is, does that change kind of what you want to measure perhaps, or even kind of the culture that you're trying to achieve post-COVID?
Yeah. So great point about culture. I'm glad that you hit on that. So I do think that matters. The way that I try to think about it is, how do we use technology or process or operational excellence to make that associate or employee, whatever you might call call them, more efficient. Not necessarily replace that employee. Now, in some cases, that might be the case, but freeing up that associate to focus on things that are more value add toward the guest or more value add toward the operations. So, for example, it's sort of a silly example, but I'll bring it back to hospitality again. If there's something that can be quickly answered for a guest, maybe it's the hours of the gym or restaurants nearby or those types of things, that they can get that more quickly. That would be a great use of technology because the customer gets what they want. They can do it whenever they want to do it. They can, I hate to say it, but sometimes you multitask. They can do that on a mobile app while they're on a conference call, right? Where they're not able to necessarily do that if they have to call down to the front desk. That's that opportunity. The other thing that does is that now frees up, using the hotel example, that GSR, and when I say GSR, that's our guest service representative at the front desk, to be providing a more face-to-face, interaction where that's necessary. Speaking with the extended stay brands, now, we talk about technology. We might use technology a little bit differently than some other hospitality brands might. And a big example is checking into your room and using a digital key. That's not something that our brand offers right now. And we could certainly try to keep up and do that and implement that. We actually want our new guests to stop by the front desk because our value proposition is a little bit different. Our guests stay with us a little bit longer. So we want them to
build a
we want
relationship.
to see their face. We want build a relationship. So well said, exactly. And explain our service offering of why our breakfast might look different to them and why we do housekeeping every X number of days and what our service offering is that's different than a traditional transient hotel. So if we were just trying to keep up with hospitality and offer a digital key, we would miss that customer touch point opportunity, which is so important to our brand.
I love what you're saying here. I think a couple points. First point is how important context is around technology versus, the face-to-face. I think in terms of just sharing that, and this is to everyone listening, just sharing kind of the whys behind the technologies being implemented and what it can really do versus not, and kind of our roles in that already would help. And the second thing I heard, which is great, is really being clear on what problem you want technology to solve. And saying, hey, it's not going to do 18 things really well. It's going to do 5 or 6 things. And here's what it'll do amazingly well. And I think that might help, all the listeners, if you've got that, and sharing that kind of short list with the frontline teams, that they feel more comfortable in directing folks to those types of narrower functionality, right? So they feel like, okay, I can actually, this technology is helping me, versus wondering, because we've all felt like, I'm not going to kind of recommend or have someone go through that chat bot because I don't have really a full understanding of context or really confidence in what it's doing. So great points there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's equally true for technology or, even process change. I mean, really what we're talking about is change management, right? And
totally.
Sometimes as practitioners or implementers, I know I've done it, we forget how important that change management is. Because if people don't understand the why, they're not going to necessarily be bought in. When we implemented our quality program, we spent just as much time around training and education and helping with self-assessments and really having all of our hotels understand the why we were doing it. Not just that their score is going to go into, a CX scorecard at the end of the day. Yeah, that's the outcome, but understanding why we're doing that and why it matters to them and why it's going to impact the revenue at their hotel and why if they do these things, it's going to help them get some higher rated business and might drive up social media scores, which then can drive up rate, which then drives profitability, which then, for them might drive their bonus, right? So all those things, asking all those whys and connecting all those dots, I think is critically important.
Yeah, that's true. And I empathize kind of with all the operators in the hospitality space. I think about frontline teams. Okay, you've got kind of the inbound reservations, customer service, right? But I think we also discount that everyone working in the building, keeping that supply chain, your rooms ready and available, right, and clean,
Right.
and just how that might even magnify my thinking around what really frontline means, right, in terms of the culture and the analytics and the metrics. Um, Anything that you know you want us to want to share with the non-hospitality folks, or even the hospitality folks, kind of what maybe the next couple of years might look like for this space, and if there's a couple of priorities or things that they should be thinking about transforming now that would help them prepare for the future. I don't know if the new
Sure.
norm is just going to be kind of a hybrid workforce, clean your own room kind of situation. I don't know. What's kind of the crystal ball saying now?
Yeah, so we can go back in 2 years. We can see how accurate my crystal ball, how accurate it is. There's a few things that I'm doing that I might recommend others to do as well. And the first is, we all have, you mentioned data, Ramon, right? Don't be afraid to look at data differently. Maybe even blow up what your current scorecard is or what your current thinking is, and take a look at the reports that you have, the data that you report on, ask why you're doing it, right? And see what insights you're getting from it, because data is great. Information or insights are what matter, right? So make sure you're getting your data, or make sure you're getting your information and your insights, and what are you doing with it? I think COVID taught me that better than anything else. As we were into it, it didn't really matter necessarily what my NPS score was. Maybe that was a good barometer, but we completely shifted over to our text analytics, and we're focusing on our text analytics daily, where we used to look at that. We used to look at that monthly, but we looked at it daily because that's what was telling us what was going on in our hotels from the guest side. We combined that with the good conversations that we had going on with our employees and our associates, and that gave us a good perspective over our almost 700 hotels, what's going on. So that would be the first thing. Don't be afraid to look at data differently. And then the other thing, you said how things might be different over the next couple of years. Just don't. This is cliche, and it's probably been said a lot of different times in different ways. Sometimes it's easy to just do things the same way, because, and especially when they're working. And I think the bravest people, or the most successful people, are even when things are working well, don't be afraid to ask what's next. And it's okay to fail fast, learn, revise, go do next. But those are, I think, the companies that perform the best. And those are the types of people that, when I look for others to associate myself with, that I like to associate myself with. And I learn more from them, that they're doing things differently. They're trying something unique. They're thinking about something in a way that somebody else hasn't thought about it before. And you might think, well, why are you doing that? You're successful. You're the leader in your industry, whether it's restaurants or hotels or retail or whatever. But I think the innovators and the ones who aren't afraid to say what's next and let's try something a little bit different, those are the exciting people to be around. Those are the exciting companies to work for. So for your listeners here, you have that opportunity to be that person, or to make that your company.
I love that. And what I hear in all of that is, with the new norm, we're just going to have to kind of try to get out of our own way sometimes. Even though you can hang your hat on success, things are changing so quickly. I love your point around trend data is important, but it's really the twitchiness, right? And your comments and the kind of what's happening right now, what's the issue of the day, what's the theme of today, and that it's really going from, just visually, an albatross flies millions or hundreds of miles to catch one huge fish, right? Now we're maybe have to put on our hummingbird hats, right? And we're flying around, zipping around just to try to get any little bit of nectar, right? And I'm not saying either one is correct, but we're going to have to maybe possibly add some new skills. What like when you're interacting with your leadership team, and this might help our audience too, how do you make that change safe for them? I mean, I hear fail fast, but companies, well, you failed too much, right? And so what's the thinking around giving people kind of that psychological safety and being able to kind of take those chances, look at different kind of insights and act on those to help you kind of adjust to the new norm?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's the same answer of what you tell your customers. You need to explain why it's important, right? I mean, you don't just want to go try something just for the sake of trying something with no data or no successive measure, no measurement success criteria. You need to have all that, but understanding why. Communication. Everybody always says communication is so important, but it really is. And communication is two ways. So not just sharing, within our leadership team or any of the leadership teams that people might be part of, it's important not just to share why you might think something is important or why you're going to go down a certain path or recommending it, but likewise, very sincerely encouraging feedback from that team of, well, what do they think? How does it impact them? How can you make it more comfortable for them? How can you make them understand? Because communication has to be two ways. I think it can be very dangerous that you can get a lot of nodding heads, especially in this virtual world that we're in right now, or we take silence for acceptance. And I think you need to be careful about that. That doesn't necessarily mean people are bought in. And you won't always get 100% alignment. Even within our CX strategy that we had built at extended stay, I would be lying to say if we all always held hands and said, yes, this is going to be great and it's perfect and we're going to hit all these targets, right? That's a challenge, right? But that's what good leadership teams should do, right? There should be some friction there. There should be some tension. If there's no healthy friction or healthy tension, then that leadership team isn't doing their job. And it's the same way you communicate with your customers, right? You brought up the point earlier, in the podcast of, how do you have success with your customers, especially in these times? Like I think you mentioned, cleaning your own rooms or breakfast changing. I think it's being transparent. I think COVID taught us, and especially taught me, people are very understanding. They're very reasonable, but you really need to set expectations correctly. So we actually spent more time up front trying to align expectations, even if it was disappointing that breakfast might not be offered or a fitness center might be closed or a laundry facility might have reduced capacity. Those were bad messages or difficult messages to deliver, but a guest appreciated it if we delivered it earlier in their guest journey prior to check-in versus communicating that after we handed them their room key and said, oh yeah, by the way, our gym is closed, right? Same situation, but when you communicate it at a different time and set the expectation, it completely changes the guest experience.
Yeah, I love this. And I'm really starting to hear one theme come up for me is how you've really, how employee experience and guest experience really is the same approach, right?
Yes.
In terms of just communicating, setting expectations, looking at what kind of data to look at, right, and act on. it's not so much the long-term trends that are important, but those are, but kind of the real-time feedback that you're seeing. Just to finish this off here, are there any other kind of things that people out on the field can think about in terms of just, getting through this? I mean, and I've said this over and over, but customer expectations are through the roof, right? They're all coming in really upset, really kind of hot. Employees are checking their kind of their own health, kind of meters and trying to find meaningful work. And so here we are as leaders in the middle, kind of trying to satisfy both. And plus the business as well has needs. What are just some final kind of some advice or points you want to share with the team here?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I'm a little old-fashioned sometimes with some of this, so I'm going to give you an answer that isn't super, whiz-bang technical. But at the end of the day, we all, as human beings, have a need to feel accepted, feel important, and feel heard. And whatever strategy that you're designing around your customer experience, your employee experience, you said it so well, Ramon, about how they're so tightly linked. Listen to your employees, listen to your associates, and build strategies and technologies that support and enable them to do their jobs better, allow them to spend time doing those value add activities. And you bring up the example of customer expectations are as high as they've ever been. I would agree with you, but I'd also say people tend to be more understanding if they're communicated with appropriately. So if I have that opportunity to speak to an upset guest, and believe me, it's not always going to work, I understand, but if you're able to do that and look them in the eye and have a conversation, that's a better way to do that than I can't talk to you right now. You need to go call our guest relations phone number, right? And of course, that's not something that we would ever want to do. And sometimes that's necessary based on the staffing that you have. But just remembering, we're all driving toward the same thing, right? And many of us who are CX professionals, we experience that same thing in reverse every single day, whether it's going to a restaurant, staying in a hotel, flying an airline, or shopping at the supermarket. So, look for ways in your personal life as you have interactions of good experiences that you have at those establishments and experiences that aren't as good. Take those back, take those as learning, always be learning, and take those back as ways to learn of how you might be able to use that as an opportunity to improve your own organization. So there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Wow, that's a great way to close. I just want to, for the audience, just what I heard was, embrace what's in front of us. Know that it's a challenge. Yeah. Be honest with it, with your team and your customers. And as Mike has displayed here, just a lot of humility, empathy towards the customer experience and employee experience. So with that, Mike, thank you very much. We're going to include your LinkedIn profile as well for anyone to reach out, and as well as mine. And to our listeners, thank you again for joining us on our most recent CXperts podcast. With that, thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.